man kills a prostitute in his hotel room, cuts an X into her body, puts his clothes down neatly, and washes himself. He is found in a shocked state, hiding in the hallway of the same hotel. An elementary school teacher kills his wife, carves an X into her body, and jumps off the second floor of their home. He is then found in shock over what he's done. A doctor kills a man in the men's bathroom, cuts an X into his neck, and peels his face off. A police officer shoots his partner in the head and drags his body inside to, again, carve an X into his body. While interrogated, he mimics that same cutting motion, as if hypnotized. They all have one thing in common. They all met him. In Kiyoshi Kurosawa's Cure, we follow Detective Takabe as he investigates a string of mysterious murders, while also coping with his wife's deteriorating mental state, as she seems to be developing a serious case of Alzheimer's. This no doubt is a deep source of anger and resentment for Takabe, feelings he quickly represses and stores away for the sake of social cohesion, I suppose, and perhaps to upkeep the image of a dutiful husband. But that tension, I think, shows the film's central theme: the repressed human instincts and emotions that lie just beneath the surface of mundane, everyday life. The quote-unquote mastermind of these murders, the man that, if this were your regular, run-of-the-mill crime thriller, would be the true perpetrator, is Mamiya. Although, of course, he doesn't remember that's his name. He doesn't remember anything. And anything that is told to him is just as quickly forgotten. He just appears, quite literally. He just sort of becomes in this beach. He doesn't know who he is, or where he's going. This man and his wife take him in to help him, and he doesn't even seem particularly interested in finding out his identity. Mamiya asks him what his wife does for a living. The man tells him she's a housewife. Mamiya then asks, "Who is?" The man then reiterates, "My wife." Mamiya stops for a second and thinks out loud. "Ah, the woman in the pink negligee." The man asks if he saw his wife, to which Mamiya responds, "I don't remember anything. You do." He lights a cigarette and insists on hearing about the man's wife. Not long after, the man kills his wife and jumps off the second floor window. By far the most interesting part of this interaction is Mamiya saying he doesn't remember anything. You do, implying that he has some kind of access to this man's memories. And then we have the lighter, or the fire, which seems to begin the hypnotic state within this man. We see more evidence of this later on when Mamiya is in the police station. Mamiya again asks to hear about the officer, and has no interest in learning about himself. Of course, he then later kills his police partner. But it's during the next hypnosis that we begin to understand the possible motives behind the murders. Mamiya is sent to the hospital and appears to use water to begin the hypnosis. He then says, "All the things that used to be inside me, now they're all outside. So I can see all the things inside you, doctor, but the inside of me is empty." It seems he has become a kind of vessel for the memories and emotions of others. He is essentially able to diagnose the psychological complex buried in the doctor's unconscious. Specifically, in her case, her complex surrounding men. She has been consistently belittled by men. Mamiya brings up memories of men undermining her capabilities as a doctor and recalls an episode from medical school when she dissected the corpse of a man. He suggests that, whether she admits it or not, she enjoyed it, that it might have brought her some sort of catharsis, and that her desire to be a surgeon was really an unconscious desire to cut a man open. Her murder fits perfectly with these unconscious longings. She goes into the men's bathroom, quite literally a men's space, where she would not be welcome in, the same way she feels in her profession. She kills this random man, peeling his face back, beginning to dissect him. We even get to see how her complex surrounding men affects her daily life, whether she realizes it or not. Just before this, when she is about to examine a patient, she needs him to lower his pants to check for something. I'm not really sure what exactly, but she remains professional, but the man is visibly uncomfortable and makes a crude, awkward joke during the inspection, saying, "You're not shy, are you?" To most people, this might be seen as just an awkward joke, an attempt to sort of diffuse the tension in the room, but she most likely sees it as another form of belittlement, another reminder that she is a woman and so must navigate the world differently because of it. But would you believe it if I told you that even these small offenses are enough to cause violent hatred within the human soul? After all, in this very film, the psychologist friend of Takabe says, even if you manage to hypnotize someone, you can't change their basic moral sense. A person who thinks murder is evil won't kill anyone under hypnotic suggestion. But that's where we find the true horror of this film, in this philosophical presumption that violence, horrendous violence even, to the point of murder, is an integral part of human nature. As the psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud says in Reflections on War and Death, in our unconscious we daily and hourly do away with all those who stand in our way, all those who have insulted or harmed us. The expression, "the devil take him," which so frequently crosses our lips in the form of an ill-humored jest, but by which we really intend to say, "death take him," is a serious and forceful death wish in our unconscious. Indeed, our unconscious murders, even for trifles. Like the old Athenian law of Draco, it knows no other punishment for crime than death. And this is not without a certain consistency, for every injury done to our almighty self-glorifying self is at bottom a crimen laesae majestatis, essentially meaning the crime of injured majesty. Thus, if we are to be judged by our unconscious wishes, we ourselves are nothing but a band of murderers, just like primitive man. And I would like to hone in on that last phrase, just like primitive man, because I believe that is the underlying meaning behind the monkey in this film. A sort of symbol of our underlying nature, of our, in the grand scheme of things, not so distant ancestor. The first time we see a monkey, it's caged, perhaps meant to show our desire to store away, to repress that aspect of ourselves, to put at the forefront, in Jungian terms, our persona, our pro-social mask, that veneer of civility that holds our society together. We don't have to go far back to see the more animal qualities of man. After all, it was not so long ago where public hangings were a spectacle to the public, an event for the entire community, where people looked death in the eyes and were fascinated, were entertained, or in some cases relieved. Like the doctor, they got some catharsis out of it. People would quite literally cheer for it. It is, to our modern sensibilities, frankly disgusting, but it is nonetheless human. Not long after, still in Mamiya's apartment, we see this monkey dead on top of the bathtub that looks as if it was sort of sacrificed. This we could interpret as our sacrificing of our instinctual, animalistic selves, these urges and drives we repress to maintain social order and cohesion. Yet, by showing us the caged monkey, and then the sacrificed one, Kurosawa might also be trying to show us the natural result of said repression. In Mamiya's apartment, we see that he took an interest to the psychoanalyst Carl Jung, a student and colleague of Sigmund Freud. So to put it in Jungian terms, the caged monkey could be seen as the Jungian shadow held captive. The Jungian shadow in this case being those more primitive instincts of man, his capacity for violence, or even his desire for violence, which he of course rejects or refuses to acknowledge. But the dead monkey could show what happens when repression becomes absolute. The shadow unintegrated and symbolically killed, and forced deeper underground where it festers and comes out more violently than it would had it been integrated in a healthy manner. Carl Jung once said, "It is a frightening thought that man also has a shadow side to him, consisting not just of little weaknesses and foibles, but of a positively demonic dynamism." Another quote, "Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is." Just after seeing the monkey, Takabe sees this sort of jumbled vision. And when he heads home, finds his wife. But it wasn't real. We could say that it was Takabe's unconscious death wish, his resentment for his wife manifesting in her elimination. Perhaps in that moment, we could say Takabe was hypnotized, much like the killers he's investigating. Later on, Takabe lashes out at Mamiya, telling him, "Lunatics like you have it easy, while citizens like me go through hell." If we read this through a Freudian lens, Takabe could be talking about this act of repressing this animalistic shadow of humanity. In Civilization and its Discontents, Freud argues that civilization itself is built upon repression. To live together peacefully, in order to have a somewhat harmonious collective, we must repress our instinctual drives for violence, and of course, since this is Freud, our sexuality. This is the price for collective order, and as Freud argues, it's also a source of deep suffering. Interestingly, Takabe here brands Mamiya as a lunatic, meaning that he's completely unbound from the rules and obligations of civilization. I mean, he quite literally doesn't remember who he is. He is, as he said, a sort of empty shell, which is what allows him to see the buried repressions of others. He has no persona. Meanwhile, Takabe calls himself a citizen. He's branding himself to be civilized. And so he's continually crushed by the weight of this civilizational repression. He has to hide his anger at his wife's declining mental state. He has to be stoic in his work. He has these two personas to upkeep, this loving husband and this professional detective. Although we do see his repression bubble up to the surface on some occasions, mainly in his extreme anger towards Mamiya. You could say that it's because Mamiya is able to see through his persona, but also, I suspect, because of his general forgetfulness, which would no doubt remind him of his wife. And so any outbursts we see from Takabe against Mamiya, I think might as well be interpreted as what he wishes he could do or say to his wife. Another reoccurring symbol we see on the sacrifice monkey, and in all of the murders, is of course the X. It's definitely the most prominent symbol in the film, as it seems to be present in both the start and end of the hypnosis the characters are placed under. There are, I suppose, multiple ways to interpret this X. On the surface, we could read it as a sort of signal, just a marking of something. You know, X marks the spot and all that. As if Mamiya, or whatever force he's channeling, is pointing directly to those uncomfortable psychological realities we talked about before. But in my opinion, a more interesting interpretation is to see the X as an act of crossing out, of eliminating. Here, not only would it refer to the rejection of those repressed psychological truths, but also, to hearken it back to Jung, to the elimination of the persona. So when the killers carve an X into their victims, we could see it as a symbolic destruction of the persona, the carefully maintained mask that conceals the shadow. In that moment, when hypnotized by Mamiya, the unconscious is let loose. That mask of civility is completely gone, and only the unrefined animalistic drive remains. Now that we've diagnosed the sickness, let's examine the cure. If we're going to talk about what this film considers to be a cure to this psychological suffering, then we obviously have to talk about the man Mamiya was writing a school dissertation on. Franz Anton Mesmer was an 18th century physician with several alleged doctorates. I say alleged because, although he claimed to have them, historians can't find evidence of them. He's credited with developing the process of animal magnetism, more commonly known as mesmerism. This practice was later refined and renamed as hypnotism by the Scottish doctor James Braid. Today, hypnotism obviously doesn't have the best reputation. It's often seen as some sort of gimmick or a sort of sideshow at a circus. But it's important to acknowledge its influence on the early stages of psychoanalysis. Sigmund Freud himself experimented with hypnotism in the early days of his practice. One popular example is that in the late 19th century, many women in Vienna and other wealthy parts of Europe were coming down with what at the time could only be called hysteria. These women would experience paralysis in parts of their body, uncontrollable laughter, convulsions, and I guess just general manic behavior. Freud, along with some of his contemporaries at the time, discovered that placing these women in a sort of hypnotic state would alleviate their symptoms. But not only that, it would sort of allow them to speak more freely, and often giving them the chance to express their thoughts and emotions in a safe, non-judgmental space was enough to get rid of their symptoms entirely. You can see how this was the beginning of what became the talking cure, which is essentially the foundation of modern psychiatry. According to an anonymous writer in a series of letters, animal magnetism could itself cause various symptoms in what Mesmer called the crisis, and inducing this crisis itself was the cure. It was meant to shock one's body into convulsion, to remove obstructions, inducing vomiting. Now, this is interesting, at least from a narrative standpoint, since vomiting is, from a Freudian perspective, an act of purging, and we do see in the killers of this film a purge in a sense. They are purging themselves of their repressed aggression and violent desires, murderous desires in this case. But there is a second stage of this crisis which Mesmer induced, a more rare state, described in those anonymous letters as a remarkable state, where the patient is granted, and I quote, perfect and unobstructed vision. In other words, all opacity is removed, and every object becomes luminous and transparent. In this state, the patient was, quote, believed to be able to see through the body and find the cause of illness, either in themselves or in other patients. This shows an uncanny resemblance to Mamiya himself, who is able to, according to himself, see the insides of the doctor, and so her persona is transparent, and he's able to diagnose her quote-unquote illness. I think an important theme of this movie is identity, the self, or I guess more accurately, one's perception of the self. We, the viewer, are a lot like the police chief, continually being asked by Mamiya, "Who are you?" And then of course there's Mamiya himself, who quite literally has no identity, and is able to see through the proposed identity of others, as he asks Takabe whether he is the detective or the caring husband. And that question, I think, really gets to the bottom of everything, because those two identities, those two personas, are representative of two drastically different people. The husband has to be warm and empathetic, but the detective has to be cold and detached. In both, he must compromise in some major way, and put his own wants aside for the sake of the persona. And somewhere in the middle, I suppose, are Takabe's true desires, which he, of course, like all of us, represses, as those desires might be antisocial in some way and would not fit with his proposed personas. This, I suppose, brings forth the question of how can we truly know ourselves. The 17th century French philosopher René Descartes, the sort of ultimate skeptic in the history of Western thought, you could say, doubted all external phenomena, all material. The one thing he could not doubt was his own existence, his own consciousness. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. And so introspection for Descartes was clear, totally transparent. If anybody knows you, your internal existence, it would be you. However, a thinker like Freud claims that our introspection is consistently unreliable, not transparent at all. We consistently repress aspects of ourselves in order to protect ourselves and maintain social order. Aspects that do not get revealed willingly through lone introspection. Mamiya, with his lack of identity, becomes a very unpleasant mirror, forcing people to confront these antisocial aspects of their personalities, their violent desires, their nasty thoughts which they would never verbalize. Like when he continually asks the police chief, "Who are you?" And he becomes extremely angry from, of course, not being answered, but unconsciously, I believe, at being forced to confront himself. This is what I think Mamiya means by "you hear my voice, you're different from them, you're someone." He's saying that Takabe actually understands the question, "Who are you?" This could also be the first clear sign that Takabe is becoming Mamiya, his heir, his successor. Since he understands the question, he will become a mirror, just like Mamiya. I believe that's why he goes to the warehouse and listens to the phonograph that hypnotized the first mysterious figure, the catalyst for this cure. And this is why Mamiya marks him with an X, as he's ritualistically killed. He's passing on the cure to Takabe. And we of course see at the end of the film Takabe, much like Mamiya, having a sort of hypnotic effect on the waitress, who grabs a knife and presumably kills someone in the restaurant. On a side note, one question I see a lot of people ask about the story is whether Takabe killed his wife or not. One moment it appears like he is going to stab her and draw the X on her body, much like the other murders. Then we see that he's actually leaving her at the hospital while he solves this case. Then we see her body being dragged with the X carved into her. I believe it doesn't matter, because even if he did not kill her, by placing her in the hospital, most likely forever, he has eliminated her. One of those many murders our unconscious performs in our daily lives. Now, this film was clearly made to be sort of up to interpretation, and I've shown you mine. So I suppose to keep the ambiguous nature of the film, I'll leave you with the question. あんたは誰だ?
In this world, no plus money equals yes. Don't step on me. I'm not a bug. Don't film lizards. Someone might want to eat it.